Hello, welcome back to St Mary's Lent course. This is the second of 4 sessions, and I'm delighted you're able to join with us from home today. Last week, we got thinking about prayer, noticing that our feelings around prayer can be complicated, and that very often we can overcomplicate prayer. And we can overcomplicate it so much that we can start to feel guilty or quite inadequate when it comes to prayer. And then we realised that actually everyone feels that way. We looked at Moses and the burning bush and wondered how that image of the burning bush and holy ground might affect the way we approach prayer. If we were to believe we were standing on holy ground all of the time, if we were to believe that God was reaching out to us through creation to communicate with us all of the time, that there are burning bushes around us to the left and to the right, metaphorically, how might that affect the way we approach prayer? The Incarnation, Jesus Christ, was no accident or last-minute detour. The existence of God amongst us was planned right from the start of creation. The whole of creation moved to the moment of the birth of Christ amongst us. The entrance of the divine in human form has been part of the plan since the beginning, because relationship is what we're here for. And if we can get our heads around that Jesus wasn't some sort of last-minute idea or a solution to a problem, that actually Jesus is the point and relationship is the purpose, then that also might change the way we approach prayer and communicating with God. In our resources list this week, I've included a link to another YouTube video. It's about 10 minutes long, but it's really worth a look if you've got a bit more time. It's Rob Bell from quite a while ago when he was recording videos under the banner Pneuma. And it's a video called Breath, and he explores, again, very similarly to what I've been talking about, what it might mean if we were to believe in our active God all around us. And he thinks particularly about the breath that God breathed into humanity at the start of creation, and how God's presence is breathed into all of us throughout our daily lives. I think Rob Bell's theology can really help us embrace a more generous and active understanding of God, and that in itself might transform how we approach prayer. So I commend that video to you this week. Last week as well, I gave you a brief introduction to Ignatius of Loyola, who had a dramatic impact on the church in the 16th century. He was viewed almost equally with suspicion and admiration by those in power. Ignatius worked with hundreds and later thousands of people through the Society of Jesus who wanted to learn to pray and to meet with God. He taught them through conversation and by encouraging them to notice what was going on inside themselves and bringing that to God. The Jesuits are still pioneering this work today. And then finally last week, I encouraged you to practice some silence, some stilling. I wonder how that's been. Have you found a few moments this week to practice being still? Our minds are so active, so busy, and often so stimulated that it can be a really hard practice to cultivate, but often really worth the effort. And I do hope you had some glimmers of joy as you stilled yourself over the first week of Lent. This week, we're going to expand on that stilling exercise with the next bit of a prayer that began with Ignatius and has been adapted many times since the 16th century for contemporary settings. It's called the Prayer of Review, or Examen, and I'll be referring it to the Examen throughout these videos. The spirituality that comes from Ignatius and has been developed over hundreds of years has been summed up on many occasions as finding God in all things. Finding God in all things. And the Examen helps us to do that. Now, that phrase, finding God in all things, can be misunderstood. It's not about God being in a tree, for example, but the thumbprint of the Maker is on every tree around us. The thumbprint of the Maker is all around us, so we can discern and meet God in and through things. So that means that nature, trees included, can be an amazing window into the character of God. There are windows into the character of God all around us. Another image for that burning bush of God communicating to us. Ignatius was known as a contemplative in action. Contemplative prayer was never for him about staying where it was. It was to enable life to unfold in the life of Christ. Remember Francis and the birds from last week? If the whole of creation is already worshipping God, if God is already active around us, then our job is not to conjure up God's power like some genie out of a bottle through our prayers. It's simply to notice God at work already and then decide to join in. We contemplate in order to go. Contemplatives in action. Now, this is very different to other forms of silent prayer. You're not on this course going to be simply breathing and sitting in silence, though prayerful meditation can be a beautiful thing. The type of prayer we're exploring is going to take us a little bit further on from silence. It doesn't involve emptying ourselves, but rather stilling ourselves so that we can review our days and see God at work in them. So, an introduction to the Examen. We've got a couple of weeks exploring this prayer, and I've put some resources for you to be able to have a little read and a listen to some other things as well. The Examen was a foundational prayer that Ignatius taught those undertaking his spiritual exercises. He advised to do at least a couple a day. It was very focused on confession at first, but has been built on and adapted over the years to be a prayer that can help us spot the gifts of God in our day and lay down those places of disappointment and hurt to his healing and forgiveness. And it was always done, so it's done daily now by the Jesuits. It was done a couple of times a day when the Jesuits did the spiritual exercises, which was over 30 days. And now it's a practice that Jesuits will do at least once a day now. We're invited to take part in this prayer too, and you can do it any time of day you like. What I want you to think about this week is when you are at your best, give your best to God if you can, even if it's just 5 minutes of your best. So if you're a morning lark, have a go at the Examen prayer in the morning, looking back over the day before. And if you're a night owl, it can be a really nice night prayer to use. At this point in the course, I'd really encourage you to take a few notes after a time of prayer. So maybe get yourself a notepad or maybe make some notes on your phone. How did it feel? What was difficult? Where was the peace? Make a note of the effects different times of day have on praying. For me, the Examen is a perfect way to end the day. It helps still me and hand things over to God, and can often mean I have a better night's sleep than I would have done otherwise. But I know for others, actually, they find it a really stimulating prayer, and they couldn't possibly sleep afterwards. They need to talk afterwards. So if that's you, then you're definitely a person to do it in the morning. But if it helps you sleep, then by all means, make it your night prayer. The key to all of this on this whole course is to learn to pray as you can, not as you can't. It's to stop thinking in deficit about assuming that bit of prayer which we're not very good at, that must be the way that God wants me to do it. It's to lean into those areas that come naturally to us, because that's how we're going to most easily and quickly meet with God. The Examen has several stages to it, but this week I invite you to keep it quite simple. Begin with one of the stilling exercises that you've been practicing, then ask for God's light to see over your day. And then you play your day through your mind, very much like watching a video cassette on kind of one of those sort of slow fast forward motions. As you play through your day, notice and give thanks for the place of hope and lightness. For the times of despair and difficulty, try and notice without judging yourself or others. Just give them to God. If it's been a really tough day, skip this part and just stay with gratitude for whatever goodness you did find. And then end with a time of conversation. Speak to Jesus about your day as you would a friend. Now that might feel strange at first. We don't speak to friends with grand words or phrases. We don't tend to implore them to listen. We just chat. And that's exactly the sort of prayer I'd like you to try with Jesus. And then we listen. Leave some space to listen. Keep it simple. Keep practicing. And we'll build on this prayer once again next week. Links with this video will take you to some worksheets for simple prayers of Examen, and also some audio resources if having someone lead you in prayer is helpful. Be gentle, pray as you can, not as you can't.